Hi, colleagues and judges. Thank you for being here this evening and listening to our presentation. So our team is 2 degrees cooler than you. So these are all of our team members. And let's carry on. So what are we doing? So today we were able to contribute to the goal to limit the increase in global average temperatures to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. So we as a team, we were able to accomplish that goal of keeping it at least underneath 2, and that's what we did today. As far as our climate change vision, we all worked together and we sacrificed as a team, all of us, from agriculture and land, energy efficiency and sustainable energies, as well as the carbon price, the government officials. We all worked together and sacrificed and pulled together in one direction so that we could have an impact and a sustainable lifestyle changes. So, and in the graphs, which Chris will further discuss, we were able to reach our goal of keeping the global climate to 2%.
So looking at the graphs, we can see that we did meet our 2-degree goal, and that was our major emphasis of our project today. We met our 2 degrees and we reduced our carbon dioxide emissions. How we did that we'll discuss here in a few. There were some people that may not have enjoyed it as much as others did. But we significantly reduced our requirement of fossil fuels by increasing the total number of renewables that we ended up using. So how did we do this? We had 4 or 5, depending on how we define them, policy levers that we, as a group, decided that we could use. The first was the taxes and subsidies. We significantly taxed the fossil fuel industry. This actually was their recommendation. And this is why we all worked together. They said, hey, you know what? We know that this 2-degree thing is very important. We are willing to sacrifice, and we still will get there as a group. We also subsidized renewables significantly. We maxed that out. We said that was the most important thing for us in our group was renewables, so we focused on that. And you can see through when we get to the next couple slides how we used the carbon credits. We didn't max it. We didn't say, hey, we're going to just do 200 and just go with it. We came to some consensus. We started off initially pretty low and we worked our way up, but we were able to utilize the carbon credit to affect our 2 degrees Celsius target. The carbon tax allocation from those carbon credits, we gave it all to renewables. Again, renewables to us seemed like it was sold that this is the way to reduce our 2 degree, to get to our 2 degrees as much as possible. So how did we get to that? Energy efficiency was the other lever that we really utilized, and we took it out on the energy efficient people a little bit too hard maybe. That they are the ones that sacrificed probably the most to help us get to that goal. And then agriculture and land use. This is sort of a pseudo lever in the sense that some of us thought it was an assumption of how it would be utilized versus telling people, hey, you will have to do these 2 things. And by utilizing the agriculture and land lever, it's going to cause some significant changes in our food policy and agriculture policy. Go for it.
Okay, so we kind of laid out our timeline in 3 blocks, really, most heavily in the first 2. Basically, the first 30 years we devoted to building taxes and subsidies into kind of how we think about energy policy. Beginning to invest in food and energy efficiency best practices so that we figure out what those are and we find ways to make them feasible and make them sustainable. We begin rolling out our innovations over this period of time, and we also begin to kind of assess the funding flows and see where we are so we can reassess at multiple points within that first 30-year time period and make sure we're really getting it right. By the time we hit the second block of time, 2045 to 2075, we want to be kind of looking at assessing where we've come, like where are we? So we rebalance kind of some of our carbon funding streams if they don't seem to be working well. We assess kind of where we are in terms of people moving towards more carbon efficient lifestyles. And we also began monitoring compliance and review where we are in the midpoint of the program. And then by 2075, 2100, we want to be moving on. We want to have this be automatic so we can start focusing on other problems. We only laid out 3 years in detail. Basically, the first year, the G20 establishes a secretariat for implementation and begins to get buy-in and agreement on enforcement mechanisms. And they also began advertising this to people so that they are aware of the changes that are going to come. 2017, the carbon prices, taxes, and subsidies come into effect, and we began implementing and monitoring what we're doing. And then 2018 is really when we start looking at how to make the longer-term lifestyle changes effective.
So how did we actually accomplish our goals? Here's our actually specific layout of our economic and variables of how we said that we were going to be taxing the fossil fuel industry, highly subsidizing the renewables and tech, and the rest of our levers that we were able to play with. There are a couple assumptions under here, and we'll talk about it when we talk about some of the threats to our scenario about the population and the GDP growth. Those are very strong assumptions that we have to make to get to that 2-degree goal. The energy we actually utilized, we can see that renewables, as we've mentioned, are sort of our focal point and was sold as strong as possible. And you can see that it takes over come about 2040. And we also have a pretty stable, and we thought that was a strength of a stable energy usage. Again, we did take it out on a couple people in our group, but it was sort of consensus. Most everybody was happy about what happened. Everybody agreed that the 2-degree limit was important. The people that really aren't as happy as the others would be the energy efficiency sector. We sort of thought that that was our biggest lever to really crush on that 2-degree temperature goal. The same with the carbon price sector people. Those guys also took it sort of on the chin and as in the compromising.
We would say also that those are people who possibly outside of the specifications of this model, you could develop systems to compensate them or incentivize them to make moves towards carbon efficiency. It just wasn't something we could necessarily model very effectively under the current setup.
So in our strengths of our model, we felt that it gets us to our goal as quick as possible. We have reasonable, and we determined reasonable as in our group of population and economic growth. One of the biggest strengths I thought, and we discussed, was the robustness of this model. So those underlying assumptions, those threats of the GDP growth and the population growth, if it goes from the scenario 2 to scenario 3, that's a pretty significant group of people increasing. So we checked it out. It only increased our temperature by 0.1. So we went from 2 to 2.1 even in that next scenario. So we thought that that was a very robust model and a very strong strength. Weaknesses, though, would be we did have a low GDP score. Not a great thing. And it's a fundamental shift in global agriculture, we thought, no phased implementation of the tax policies and or the carbon policies as well. We do have some opportunities to reform the agricultural system and alter our urban lifestyles. We could also work on accelerating coal retirements. That was something we really didn't play with. And it gives us an opportunity to really focus on helping prevent natural disasters. Again, I've already talked about the threats of the assumptions. They're pretty strong assumptions for this model for it to work. Our supporting stakeholders, go ahead.
Just really briefly, the population and economy people, we kept those assumptions fairly moderate. The climate hawks were quite happy with our speed of decline in energy usage, and the sustainable energy folks were very happy with the speed with which we transitioned.
So a couple things learned through our discussion. You got to come to the table with solutions, not just problems. Everybody's got to work together. We got to get consensus. The model itself, we found that the impact of population growth was the most significant aspect that would affect our temperature goals. And understanding those GDP relationships on emissions really spurred us to focus on the renewables. And that consensus happening really took place when we established MINs for everybody and what they're willing to accept and what they weren't willing to accept, and that they were feasible and reasonable expectations. So, questions?
Sure. So you guys talked about giving your carbon credits explicitly to the renewable energy sector, is that correct? Did you consider the price shift that would occur of displacing the rising cost of fossil fuels onto the end consumer of things like fossil fuel for their cars or energy at their home?
We did, and so that was initially thought of that it would be an initial tax on the individuals. However, by subsidizing the renewable energy sector and giving them the opportunity to really develop, it would end up being actually a tax decrease, a tax subsidy on the consumer itself, because through the reduction in the price of the renewable energy.
Wonderful presentation. I commend you on your work. One concern I have is it was mentioned a couple times that certain stakeholders or industries had to give up more than others. Because it seems like your model is a bit politically vulnerable, what guarantees have you put in place while you do have assessments later in time? What kind of guarantee can you give to your stakeholders that a year or two from now, all the commitments made by those who have committed to this model won't renege or abandon the position they take?
So as part of our implementation procedure, we actually build in compliance monitoring, and I believe it does contain some discussion of consequences if stakeholders do not meet their agreements. And so there is a guarantee in there that is a formal agreement that could be enforced, which we recognize is also a very strong claim. But we felt it was necessary in order to deal with that concern that you just raised.
Sure.
So I may have missed a great presentation. So in the SWOT analysis, where do you see yourself as an organization? Under what quadrant do you guys fall under when it comes to approaching your model for implementation?
I guess that would be an opportunity for us to go and actually sell this model, sell this implementation plan to all the stakeholders outside of the initial people that were with us in our sort of working group. We would be in the opportunity sort of sector if I had to place it somewhere. Sir.
Although you had a 2% or 2 degrees Celsius change, how feasible is it to think that the global economy is going to be depressed at the numbers that you put up there?
I don't understand the question.
Well, you put the GDP at, what, 1.8?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's decreasing what the GDP is now. I mean, how feasible is that?
I mean, there's a couple of arguments here. One is that when you look at trends in GDP growth among developing and developed countries are likely to converge on a lower rate of growth to begin with. So we're not talking about a depression over what those rates are today. We're talking about a depression over what the trend in those rates is likely to be going forward. Moreover, when you look at the possible consequences of climate change and what those might have on GDP growth rates, particularly for the most vulnerable countries, which are those who are still developing, you could conceivably see depressed growth rates as a cause of that, in as much as you see it as a result of our particular policies. So I think the question of whether and to what degree growth rates are depressed as a result of our program is one that would warrant significant further analysis.
Do we have any more time? Yeah, 1 minute. Okay, ma'am.
How will governments buy into your program? Because a lot of it, focuses on taxes and subsidies. I'm curious how you will convince governments to actually, implement the program.
Well, I was actually part of the carbon price sector team, and what my team and I had discussed is that we all made sacrifices, and we felt that overall, in regards to preventing natural disasters in the long run, it would benefit governments, and we're thinking long-term benefits. So if the governments want to, help prevent these natural disasters, then they would have to also give a little and probably incur some costs. But in the long run, like I said, when it comes down to natural disasters, I mean, you saw in the beginning there were, Hurricane Katrina, several other disasters that happened that really took a toll on government, policies and whatnot. So we felt that as a government, they themselves had to make a sacrifice just as much as everybody else was doing.
So thank you guys. Appreciate you taking time to listen.
Thank you.